Cop arrests suspicious woman outside courthouse. She was the prosecutor walking into his trial. He knew the rhythm of the streets, the sounds that meant danger, and the people who tried to hide trouble behind a calm face. He had learned to trust his instincts more than anything else. That Thursday morning, the courthouse steps looked unusually busy, with people hurrying in all directions, some talking on their phones, others carrying folders, and a few simply sitting on the steps as if waiting for something important. Mark felt a slight tension in his chest, a small warning that today was not going to be ordinary. He adjusted the strap of his police vest and scanned the crowd. His eyes caught a figure that made him pause. A woman, probably in her mid-30s, was standing near the courthouse entrance. She was dressed sharply in a dark suit and high heels, holding a small folder tightly against her chest. Her movements were measured, almost cautious, and she kept looking around as if she expected someone or something. Mark had seen people act nervously in front of courthouses many times before. Sometimes it was just fear of a trial or a long wait, but sometimes it was a signal that someone was hiding something. His instincts told him this woman belonged in neither category. She was alert, but there was a tension in the way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, a subtle nervousness that didn't match her otherwise confident appearance. He took a few steps toward her, his boots making a solid thump on the marble steps. "Ma'am," he called, his voice calm but firm, "can I see some identification, please?" The woman turned, her eyes widening slightly. She looked at him with a mixture of surprise and alarm. "Oh, yes, of course," she said quickly, reaching into her handbag. But her movements were so quick and jerky that they only confirmed Mark's suspicion that she was hiding something, or at least that she was anxious enough to make him question her presence there. Mark noticed that the courthouse security was busy with the usual crowd, checking IDs and managing visitors. It seemed to him that no one else had noticed this woman. That made him even more cautious. "Ma'am, I need you to stay where you are while I check your identification," he said. His hand rested lightly on his belt, close to his radio. The woman nodded, her hands shaking just slightly as she retrieved her ID. Mark examined it quickly, his eyes scanning every detail. The name on the card didn't match any recent criminal alerts he had received, but that didn't stop him from being careful. Something in her expression, the tension in her shoulders, made him hesitate for a moment. Should he let her go? He shook his head internally. His gut said no. He radioed his partner, Officer Daniels, who was standing a few meters away. "Daniels, can you come over here? I've got a situation," Mark said quietly, keeping his voice low so as not to alarm the people around them. Within seconds, Daniels arrived, adjusting his own vest and glancing at the woman. "Everything okay?" Daniels asked. "Not yet," Mark replied. "She's acting strange. I need to be sure she's supposed to be here." Daniels looked at the woman carefully. "She doesn't look dangerous, just nervous," he said, but Mark shook his head. "It's not always about looking dangerous," he muttered. "Sometimes danger hides behind calm faces." Mark turned back to the woman, who was now looking around, perhaps realizing that something was off. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us for a quick check," he said. Her eyes widened even more, and she took a small step back. "Check? What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady despite the worry in her eyes. "We just need to confirm who you are," Mark said carefully. "Nothing serious, just standard procedure." Mark could see the people nearby beginning to notice the situation. A few stopped to look, whispering to one another, and a small crowd started to form. The woman realized she had no choice but to comply. She nodded reluctantly and followed Mark and Daniels a short distance away, keeping her folder close to her chest. As they walked, Mark noticed the way she carried herself. Despite the fear and confusion in her eyes, she had a natural confidence, a sense of authority that didn't belong to an ordinary visitor. He made a mental note to himself. Who was she? Once they reached a quieter area near the side of the courthouse, Mark asked her to place her hands behind her back. He wanted to be careful, and in his mind, it was better to be safe than sorry. "Ma'am, I'm going to read you your rights. I know this may be uncomfortable, but it's just standard procedure for situations like this." The woman blinked, and for a moment, Mark thought he had made a mistake. Her composure didn't waver, but there was a flicker of surprise in her eyes. She nodded slightly, allowing him to proceed. As he finished reading the rights, Mark noticed a few things about her that didn't fit the usual profile of someone who might cause trouble. Her hands were steady, her voice calm, and yet she radiated an energy that was unmistakable. She was confident, intelligent, and capable. For some reason, he felt a mix of suspicion and admiration at the same time. Meanwhile, Daniels was quietly observing from a few steps behind, trying to gauge the crowd's reaction. People were starting to murmur, some taking out their phones. Mark's heart beat a little faster. Mistaken arrests could lead to trouble, but letting someone slip away who might pose a risk could also be disastrous. The woman spoke again, her voice polite but firm. "Officer, I assure you I'm just here for the trial. I have work to do inside the courthouse." Mark paused. That sounded reasonable, but he couldn't risk ignoring his instincts. "I understand that, ma'am, but I have to make sure," he said. He looked down at her ID again, this time more carefully. Something about it looked official, but it didn't trigger anything in his system. Mark felt the internal conflict rising. On one hand, everything pointed to her being a professional. On the other hand, her initial behavior had set off alarms. He decided to call it in. "Dispatch, can you verify this person's credentials? Name, Julia Harper. She's currently outside the courthouse," he said into his radio. While they waited, Mark tried to keep the situation calm. He didn't want to embarrass her, and he didn't want to escalate things unnecessarily. He maintained a polite but firm tone. "Ma'am, I appreciate your patience. We're just making sure everything is in order." Julia Harper, the woman in question, nodded. She seemed to understand the position Mark was in, even if it was uncomfortable for her. Her eyes, though, were sharp, observant, and slightly amused, perhaps sensing the absurdity of the situation. Mark couldn't help but notice her professionalism. Even in a moment of tension, she carried herself with the poise of someone used to commanding respect. He realized that whoever she was used to being taken seriously. Minutes passed, and the tension in the air was palpable. People around them were starting to whisper, and Mark could feel the pressure mounting. He glanced at Daniels, who gave him a reassuring nod. They were doing their job, but now the uncertainty of the situation made it delicate. Finally, the dispatch officer's voice came through the radio. "Detective Reynolds, the ID checks out. Julia Harper is the lead prosecutor for the trial starting this morning at the courthouse." Mark froze for a moment. His heart skipped a beat. The lead prosecutor, the person he had just detained. He looked at her, and for the first time he saw her in a new light. Julia Harper was not a criminal, not a threat. She was someone in charge, someone whose job was critical to the justice system. Mark felt a rush of embarrassment mixed with relief. He had acted on instinct, but it had led to an awkward situation. He quickly stepped forward. "Ma'am, I apologize for the confusion. We didn't realize who you were. You're free to go." Julia Harper smiled faintly, her expression calm but tinged with irony. "Thank you, officer. I understand you were doing your job." Mark nodded, still feeling the weight of the mistake he had just made. As she walked back toward the courthouse entrance, he watched her disappear into the crowd of people, realizing how close he had come to causing a serious misunderstanding. He turned to Daniels, shaking his head with a small smile. "Well, that's one for the books," he said. Daniels chuckled quietly, knowing this would be a story they'd both remember for years. Even as Mark returned to his post, he kept glancing at the courthouse steps. Today, he had learned something important. Experience and instinct were powerful, but they could still be fooled by appearances. And sometimes, even a routine day could surprise a seasoned detective in ways he never expected. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense yet focused. Lawyers, clerks, reporters, and visitors moved through the grand marble hallways with purpose. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, reflecting off the polished floors and the brass rails that lined the staircases. It was the kind of day when every detail mattered and every second counted. Julia Harper walked briskly through the corridors, her heels clicking softly on the floor. She had a trial to run, a case she had prepared for months. Her mind was already focused on the evidence, the witnesses, and the strategy she had mapped out in painstaking detail. But as she rounded a corner, she noticed the murmurs and whispers from the hallway. People were glancing in her direction, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed amusement. She frowned slightly, sensing that something unusual had occurred. Earlier that morning, outside the courthouse, Julia had experienced something she had never expected. Moments ago, she had been detained by a police officer, someone she might have crossed paths with dozens of times in her career, but who had not realized her identity. At the time, she had tried to remain calm, but it had been a mix of disbelief, irritation, and a little humor that kept her composure intact. Even now, thinking back on it, she could not help but feel a faint smile tug at her lips. Mark Reynolds had acted according to his training. He had spotted a figure behaving differently, and his instincts had screamed caution. Julia, with her confident yet slightly nervous demeanor, had fit the profile of someone who needed attention, at least in his mind. In truth, Mark had been right to investigate, but he had been unaware that he was dealing with the lead prosecutor of one of the city's most important trials. Back in the courthouse, Julia quickly oriented herself. She had a reputation for calm under pressure, and she knew how to adapt. Today, her job was not just to prosecute. It was to maintain control over every aspect of the trial. She entered her office, where her assistant, Claire, was waiting with a stack of folders and notes. "Morning, Julia," Claire said, looking slightly flustered. "You won't believe what happened outside." Julia raised an eyebrow. "Do I want to know?" Claire laughed softly. "Well, yes, you were detained by a police officer. He didn't recognize you and thought you were suspicious." People outside were watching. It was awkward, to say the least. Julia let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "Detained, that's something. Was anyone hurt?" "No, of course not, but the officer was very serious about it." "He read your rights and everything," Claire replied, still holding back a grin. Julia leaned back in her chair, her mind already returning to the trial. "Well," she said, "I suppose it's a reminder that appearances can be deceiving. Let's focus on today. We have a trial to run, and we cannot afford distractions." Even as she spoke, Julia felt a mixture of relief and amusement. It was not every day that she found herself on the receiving end of such a misunderstanding. Yet in a strange way, it reminded her of why she loved her job: the unpredictability, the human element, and the chance to see how people reacted under pressure. Meanwhile, Detective Mark Reynolds was back outside, standing on the courthouse steps and watching the crowd. His mind was still running through the incident, analyzing every detail. He had seen countless situations like this: people misjudged, misunderstandings escalating, reputations at risk, but rarely had he been involved directly in one. The thought that he had almost embarrassed a key figure in the justice system made him feel uneasy. He had learned early in his career that being a police officer required both vigilance and humility. One had to be alert to notice the smallest details, but also to recognize when assumptions could be wrong. Today had been a lesson in both. Mark's eyes scanned the crowd again, seeing the ordinary visitors, the families, the journalists preparing for the trial coverage. It was easy to forget that every person had a story, a purpose, and sometimes a level of authority far beyond what one could assume at first glance. Inside, Julia was preparing for the trial. She reviewed witness statements, cross-examined her notes, and made mental checklists of points she wanted to address. Every detail mattered. Every argument had to be precise. She knew the defense team would be prepared to challenge her at every turn, and she needed to stay ahead. Her focus was absolute, but she couldn't completely ignore the earlier incident. It lingered in her mind like a small but vivid shadow, an odd memory that reminded her of the unexpected human moments that could happen even on the most important days. As the trial began, the courtroom filled with anticipation. Reporters took their seats, pens poised over notebooks, cameras aimed carefully at the judge's bench. Members of the public leaned forward, curious to see the proceedings. The defendant sat with his attorney, a calm expression masking nerves that undoubtedly ran deep. And Julia Harper, the lead prosecutor, stood with quiet confidence, her presence commanding the room. Her opening statement was precise and clear. Every word was deliberate, every fact presented with careful attention. She spoke not just to the court, but to the idea of justice itself, articulating the seriousness of the case and the responsibility she carried as a prosecutor. The judge nodded occasionally, acknowledging her points, while the jury listened attentively. Julia's voice carried authority, a balance of firmness and clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. Outside the courtroom, Detective Mark Reynolds caught glimpses of the activity through the courthouse windows. He watched Julia as she entered the room, her confidence and poise unmistakable. There was no longer any doubt about her role, her importance, or her capability. In that moment, Mark reflected on the earlier incident, realizing that his mistake had been a reminder of the human complexity in every situation. People were not always what they seemed. Authority and responsibility often came with an aura that could be easily misread. especially when filtered through the lens of suspicion. Back in the courtroom, Julia navigated the proceedings with skill. She questioned witnesses, presented evidence, and responded to objections from the defense with a calm precision that revealed her experience. Each interaction demonstrated her intelligence, her strategic thinking, and her unwavering commitment to the law. Those who watched her could sense the dedication she brought to her work, and even in moments of tension, she maintained her composure. Meanwhile, the story of the earlier detainment began to spread quietly through courthouse staff and a few reporters. Some found it amusing, others were impressed by the professionalism both the officer and the prosecutor had shown under unusual circumstances. But the incident did not disrupt the trial. Julia had ensured that the proceedings continued smoothly, demonstrating that her focus on justice outweighed any personal embarrassment. As the hours passed, Mark continued his observation from outside, reflecting on the lesson the day had taught him. Instincts and experience were valuable, but awareness, communication, and understanding context were just as important. In a world where split-second decisions could have serious consequences, it was crucial to balance caution with consideration. Today, he had learned that lesson firsthand. By mid-morning, the courtroom had reached a critical point in the trial. Julia Harper's questions had revealed key inconsistencies in the defense's case, and the jury was paying close attention. Her preparation and strategic approach were evident in every exchange, every question, and every presentation of evidence. Outside the courtroom, Mark watched as the trial unfolded, gaining a newfound respect for the work prosecutors did, especially someone as capable and composed as Julia Harper. Even as the day continued, the incident from earlier remained a quiet but significant backdrop. It had reminded both Mark and Julia of the unpredictability of life, the importance of professionalism, and the value of human understanding. For Mark, it was a humbling moment that reinforced his commitment to vigilance tempered with awareness. For Julia, it was a brief reminder of the small, unexpected events that could interrupt even the most carefully planned day, and the resilience required to continue forward without distraction. As the trial moved into its later stages, Julia maintained her focus, ensuring that every point was made, every witness questioned, and every piece of evidence examined. She moved through the courtroom with confidence, her calm authority unshaken by the memory of the earlier incident. Her ability to navigate high-pressure situations with poise and precision was a testament to her experience and dedication. For Detective Mark Reynolds, the story of the suspicious woman outside the courthouse had transformed from a tense encounter into a lesson in perspective. He had acted on instinct, yes, but he had also witnessed the complexity of human behavior, the power of professionalism, and the importance of careful observation. By the time the trial concluded for the morning recess, Mark carried with him a quiet respect for the woman he had briefly mistaken, a respect that would influence his work and his understanding of the world in subtle but meaningful ways. And so the day continued, each moment layered with tension, learning, and reflection. Outside the courthouse, life moved with its usual pace, unaware of the small but significant incident that had occurred just hours earlier. Inside, justice unfolded under the careful guidance of a skilled prosecutor, while a seasoned detective reflected on the lessons that only experience, combined with humility, could teach. It was a day that neither Julia Harper nor Mark Reynolds would forget, a day marked by misunderstanding, awareness, and the quiet, powerful reminder that appearances could be deceiving, and that every person, every moment, and every decision carried the weight of consequence and learning. The trial had reached a crucial stage. Julia Harper had spent hours meticulously examining evidence, cross-checking witness statements, and carefully crafting questions that would reveal the truth. The courtroom was silent except for the occasional rustle of papers and the soft click of pens on notebooks. Every eye was on her, watching the lead prosecutor navigate one of the most complicated cases of her career. Outside, Detective Mark Reynolds continued his post near the courthouse. Although he wasn't directly involved in the trial, he couldn't help but follow the proceedings through occasional glimpses and updates from colleagues. He felt a lingering unease from the earlier incident, the moment when he had mistakenly detained Julia outside the courthouse. That brief encounter had embarrassed him, yes, but more importantly, It had made him reflect on the unpredictability of his job. No matter how experienced he was, even a split-second decision could create unintended consequences. Inside, Julia's focus was absolute. Today was not about past mistakes or minor distractions. It was about ensuring justice. She had prepared for this trial for months, studying every piece of evidence, anticipating the defense's strategy, and rehearsing how she would present her arguments to the jury. She knew that a single misstep could influence the outcome of the case and potentially affect the lives of many people. As she questioned a key witness, Julia's skill became evident. She spoke calmly, clearly, and with authority, guiding the witness through a series of questions that revealed inconsistencies in their previous statements. The defense attorney attempted to interrupt, but Julia anticipated each objection with precision, countering it effectively while maintaining her composure. The jury leaned forward, attentive and engaged, sensing the weight of her arguments. Meanwhile, back outside, Mark reflected on the woman he had mistakenly detained. He couldn't shake the image of her calm, confident face, the way she had handled a tense situation with poise and professionalism. He realized that his instincts, while usually reliable, had been fooled by appearances. Julia Harper was a professional, someone used to handling high-pressure situations, and his mistake had been a reminder of the importance of perspective. Inside the courtroom, tension was building. The defense had just called a witness who appeared confident and composed, ready to challenge Julia's case. Julia took a deep breath, her mind racing as she considered her strategy. She needed to dismantle the witness's credibility without appearing aggressive or confrontational. She knew that her approach had to be precise. Every word mattered, and every reaction from the jury could influence the outcome. She began her questioning carefully, using a combination of logic and subtle pressure to expose contradictions in the witness's story. Her questions were clear and deliberate, guiding the witness to reveal information that had previously been hidden. The defense attorney tried to interject, but Julia remained calm, skillfully redirecting the focus back to the witness. Each exchange in the courtroom became a careful dance of words and strategy, a battle of intellect and preparation. Mark, observing from outside, felt a growing respect for Julia's work. He had always known that prosecutors played a critical role in the justice system, but seeing her in action, even from a distance, was a powerful reminder of the complexity and responsibility involved in her job. He reflected on how easily one could misjudge a person based on initial appearances, and how crucial it was to remain aware, observant, and open-minded. Back in the courtroom, Julia pressed forward. She highlighted inconsistencies in the witness's statements, referencing documents and prior testimony with precision. The jury's expressions shifted subtly as they absorbed her points, recognizing the credibility and thoroughness of her approach. Julia's skill in navigating this high-pressure situation was undeniable. She remained composed, authoritative, and persuasive throughout. The defense attempted to challenge her, questioning her methods and the validity of her evidence. Julia responded confidently, presenting additional proof and clarifying points with clarity. She did not allow the interruptions to shake her focus. Instead, she used them to reinforce her arguments, demonstrating her deep understanding of the case and her commitment to justice. Mark watched through the courthouse windows, noting the intensity of the trial and the precision with which Julia conducted herself. The earlier incident, his mistaken detainment of her, had been an awkward moment, but it now seemed almost inconsequential compared to the weight of the trial itself. He realized that professionalism, experience, and preparation could overcome even the most unexpected challenges. Julia had demonstrated all three in abundance, handling the courtroom with skill and confidence. As the trial progressed, Julia's questions began to reveal crucial information that had previously been overlooked. The witness, once confident, started to show signs of uncertainty, their answers less precise and more hesitant. Julia continued to guide the questioning, carefully drawing out the truth while maintaining a respectful and professional demeanor. The jury watched closely, recognizing the significance of each revelation. Outside, Mark reflected on the lessons he had learned earlier in the day. His instincts were valuable, but they were not infallible. He had acted with caution, but he had also allowed assumptions to influence his judgment. Julia's professionalism and composure had reminded him that appearances could be deceiving, and that understanding context and observing carefully were just as important as acting swiftly. Back in the courtroom, Julia approached a critical moment in the trial. She had identified a key piece of evidence that contradicted the witness's previous statements. Presenting it to the jury with clarity, she highlighted the significance of the discrepancy, demonstrating how it impacted the overall case. The jury members exchanged glances, recognizing the weight of her argument. Julia's ability to remain calm and authoritative, even in the face of tension, reinforced her credibility and effectiveness as a prosecutor. The defense attorney attempted to counter her points, but Julia anticipated their strategy. She remained composed, presenting additional evidence and reinforcing her arguments with precision. The courtroom became a tense environment, with every exchange carrying the potential to influence the outcome of the trial. Julia's skillful navigation of this pressure highlighted her experience and dedication to justice. Mark, observing from outside, couldn't help but admire her determination and focus. The earlier incident, while memorable, now seemed like a minor distraction compared to the complexity and importance of the trial. He recognized that every professional, whether a detective or a prosecutor, faced unexpected challenges and had to navigate them with skill and composure. Julia's performance in the courtroom exemplified these qualities, demonstrating the power of preparation, experience, and focus. As the trial reached a turning point, Julia's questioning led to a dramatic revelation. A witness admitted to providing inaccurate information earlier, acknowledging the discrepancies highlighted by Julia. The courtroom reacted with a mix of surprise and tension, recognizing the significance of this admission. Julia maintained her composure, guiding the testimony to ensure clarity and accuracy, reinforcing the integrity of her case. Outside, Mark felt a sense of relief and respect. The incident that had caused him embarrassment earlier, now, seemed like a small moment compared to the larger picture. He had witnessed firsthand the complexity and responsibility of the justice system, and he had gained a deeper appreciation for the skill and dedication required to navigate it effectively. Inside, Julia continued to manage the courtroom with precision. She addressed objections, clarified evidence, and maintained control over the proceedings. Her professionalism, intelligence, and dedication were evident in every action, leaving a lasting impression on the jury, the court staff, and even observers like Mark. As the trial moved forward, the tension remained high, but Julia's confidence and expertise ensured that the process remained orderly and focused. Each moment, each question, and each response contributed to the unfolding of justice, demonstrating the importance of preparation, skill, and resilience in high-pressure situations. By the afternoon, the courtroom had experienced one of the most intense periods of the trial. Julia had successfully navigated challenges, exposed inconsistencies, and reinforced the strength of her case. The jury had witnessed the clarity, professionalism, and determination she brought to her work, and the defense had struggled to counter her effectively. Outside, Mark Reynolds reflected on the events of the day. He had learned valuable lessons about judgment, perspective, and professionalism. The earlier incident, while initially awkward, had provided an opportunity for reflection and growth. He recognized the importance of observation, awareness, and humility in his work, understanding that even experienced professionals could misinterpret situations. Inside, Julia Harper continued to lead the trial with authority. Her focus, dedication, and skill ensured that justice was pursued with integrity and precision. The courtroom remained attentive, engaged, and respectful, recognizing the significance of her role and the weight of the case at hand. As the day drew to a close, Julia reviewed the progress of the trial, preparing for the next steps with careful consideration. Her professionalism, resilience, and unwavering commitment to justice had guided the proceedings, leaving a lasting impact on everyone present. For Mark Reynolds, the day had been a lesson in humility, awareness, and respect for the expertise of others. He had witnessed the power of preparation, skill, and composure in action, gaining a deeper understanding of the complexity of the justice system and the people who dedicated their lives to it. The incident outside the courthouse, the brief, mistaken detainment, had transformed from a moment of embarrassment into a meaningful reflection on the unpredictability of life and the importance of perspective. Both Julia Harper and Mark Reynolds had been reminded of the value of professionalism, awareness, and the human element in their respective roles. And as the courthouse emptied for the evening, the events of the day left an impression on all involved. A story of tension, skill, and integrity that would be remembered long after the trial itself concluded. It was a day marked by challenge, reflection, and the quiet triumph of professionalism in the face of unexpected circumstances. The trial had finally reached its final phase. After a long and tense day in the courtroom, Julia Harper stood confidently before the jury, reviewing the evidence and the witness testimonies once more in her mind. Every detail mattered. Every word she had spoken, every question she had asked, and every piece of evidence she had presented had been carefully measured. She knew the importance of this moment, the culmination of weeks of preparation, research, and dedication. The courtroom was unusually quiet. The jurors listened attentively, the judge observed with keen eyes, and the defense attorney tried to maintain composure despite the mounting strength of Julia's case. Julia felt a calm determination. She had faced challenges throughout her career, but this trial had been particularly demanding. It had tested her skill, patience, and ability to remain composed under pressure. Outside, Detective Mark Reynolds had been reflecting on the events of the day. He had learned so much from the incident earlier, the moment when he had mistakenly detained Julia outside the courthouse. What had been a moment of tension and embarrassment had transformed into an opportunity for reflection. He had seen firsthand how skill, preparation, and professionalism could overcome misunderstandings and create a powerful impact. Back inside, Julia Harper began her closing arguments. Her voice was steady, clear, and authoritative, capturing the attention of everyone in the room. She summarized the evidence, highlighted the inconsistencies in the defense's case, and reminded the jury of the importance of truth and justice. Each word was deliberate, each point carefully chosen to reinforce the strength of her argument. She paused for a moment, looking directly at the jury, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. She spoke not only of the facts of the case, but also of the responsibility they held as jurors, the importance of their role in ensuring justice, and the impact their decision would have on the lives of those involved. Her words carried weight, reflecting her experience, professionalism, and deep commitment to the legal system. Outside the courtroom, Mark Reynolds continued to observe from a discreet distance. He had followed Julia's work through the day, witnessing her skill, focus, and determination. He thought back to the earlier incident, realizing how easily a person could be misjudged based on appearances alone. Julia's calm handling of the situation, both outside and inside the courtroom, had left a lasting impression on him. Inside, the defense made their final arguments, but Julia remained composed. She listened carefully, noted their points, and prepared to counter with clarity and logic. She had anticipated many of their strategies, and her preparation allowed her to respond effectively without losing her composure. The courtroom was tense, every word carrying the potential to influence the jury's perception. As the jury retired to deliberate, Julia took a brief moment to breathe. The day had been exhausting, filled with intense moments, unexpected challenges, and emotional highs and lows. Yet she felt a quiet satisfaction knowing she had done everything within her power to present the truth and uphold justice. She knew that the outcome was now in the hands of the jury, and all she could do was wait. Outside, Mark Reynolds reflected on the lessons of the day. He had been reminded that appearances could be deceiving, that assumptions could be wrong, and that professionalism and composure were powerful tools in any situation. He felt a renewed respect for those who worked tirelessly to uphold justice, like Julia Harper, and a deeper understanding of the complexities and challenges they faced. The hours passed slowly as the jury deliberated. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense with anticipation. Every person in the room felt the weight of the moment. Julia remained focused, reviewing her notes and mentally preparing for any final questions or issues that might arise. She knew that patience was as important as preparation, and she remained calm despite the uncertainty. Finally, the jury returned. The foreperson stood, holding the verdict. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Julia's heart beat steadily, her focus unwavering. The foreperson spoke clearly, delivering the decision. The jury had reached a unanimous verdict. Justice had been served. Julia's case had prevailed, her skill, preparation, and professionalism having guided the trial to a fair and just conclusion. A wave of relief and satisfaction washed over Julia. She had faced challenges, handled unexpected moments, and maintained composure throughout a long and demanding day. Her dedication to her work, her commitment to justice, and her ability to remain calm under pressure had been rewarded. She allowed herself a small, quiet smile, knowing that her efforts had made a meaningful difference. Outside the courthouse, Mark Reynolds witnessed the end of the trial. Though he was not present inside, he had followed the events closely. He reflected on the lessons he had learned, the importance of careful observation, humility, and respect for the skills of others. The incident earlier, when he had mistakenly detained Julia, had been transformed into a moment of insight and understanding. He realized that every encounter, every decision, and every observation carried the potential to teach valuable lessons. After the trial, Julia took a moment to reflect on the day's events. She thought about the early morning encounter outside the courthouse, the confusion, and the brief tension it had caused. She recognized that even in moments of misunderstanding, professionalism, patience, and composure could transform a potentially negative situation into one of learning and growth. She felt gratitude for the experience, knowing it had reminded her of the importance of calmness, awareness, and perspective in every aspect of her work. Mark, too, reflected on the significance of the day. The incident outside the courthouse had initially been embarrassing, but it had provided an opportunity for introspection. He had been reminded of the importance of balance between vigilance and awareness, caution and understanding, instinct and careful observation. His respect for Julia and for the work of professionals like her had grown. He understood that true skill was not just about knowledge or experience, but also about the ability to remain composed, thoughtful, and fair in the face of unexpected challenges. As the courthouse emptied, life outside continued its usual rhythm. People went about their business, unaware of the small but significant events that had unfolded inside. Julia Harper left the courtroom with a sense of accomplishment, having fulfilled her responsibilities with integrity and skill. Mark Reynolds returned to his duties with renewed perspective, carrying with him the lessons of the day. In the days that followed, the story of the mistaken detainment became a quiet anecdote among colleagues. It was told with humor, reflection, and respect, serving as a reminder of the unpredictability of life and the importance of professionalism. Julia shared it with a few close colleagues, laughing softly at the memory, while Mark recounted it with humility and insight, acknowledging the lesson it had taught him. For both Julia and Mark, the day had been more than just a trial or a routine duty. It had been a story of human complexity, of professionalism under pressure, and of the lessons that arise from unexpected moments. It had reminded them that appearances could be deceiving, that misunderstandings could happen, and that how one responds to them defines character, professionalism, and integrity. Julia Harper continued her career with confidence, her experience in this trial further reinforcing her skills and her dedication to justice. She carried with her the memory of the unusual encounter outside the courthouse, a small but meaningful reminder of the human side of the legal system. She knew that every day would bring new challenges, but she was prepared to face them with the same calm, thoughtful, and professional approach she had demonstrated that day. Mark Reynolds, similarly, carried the lessons of the incident forward. He approached each day with heightened awareness, humility, and respect for those around him. He knew that his instincts were valuable, but he also understood the importance of perspective, careful observation, and open-mindedness. The events of that day had left a lasting impression on him, shaping the way he approached his work, his interactions with others, and his understanding of human behavior. In the end, the courthouse had witnessed more than just a trial. It had witnessed moments of misunderstanding, reflection, and personal growth. It had reminded everyone involved, lawyers, officers, jurors, and staff alike, of the complexity of their roles, the importance of professionalism, and the power of composure in the face of unexpected challenges. Julia Harper and Mark Reynolds went their separate ways at the end of the day, each carrying the lessons and experiences with them. Yet the memory of the morning incident, the trial, and the resolution remained a shared, unspoken connection, a story of human error, professional skill, and the quiet triumph of understanding, patience, and integrity. And so the day concluded not with chaos or conflict, but with reflection, respect, and the recognition that even small moments can carry profound lessons. Julia Harper had upheld justice with grace and skill, while Mark Reynolds had learned the importance of humility, perspective, and careful observation. The events would stay with them forever, a reminder that life, in all its unpredictability, offers opportunities to learn, grow, and act with professionalism and integrity.